get to the other side of this thing. So I'm going to hand over to Sangu Delle, who's our first speaker, and then we'll introduce Antoinette as well from Absa, and then we'll start with Sangu on his Masterclass. So Sangu, over to you.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thanks for dialing in, and thanks to ScaleUp Africa for organizing this event. You know, to me, the title, the Survival Series, is it could not be a more apt term, because in a crisis like this, the real key is to be able to survive. Right? That's the first order of business. If we look at what's been going on since this pandemic actually started, you've seen that there's been a massive impact on global stock markets right from the start of the outbreak. And this chart that I've shown is just as of 16th March, but across the board, markets have been in free fall. Credit markets have tightened, which basically means when credit markets tighten, it basically means that people have difficulty borrowing. And so that has just been a disaster across the board, from Japan to the UK to the US to across stock markets in Africa. Things have been terrible. Things have been really, really terrible. And the outlook is pessimistic, because the assumption is we're actually going to very likely have a global economic recession. Because when you have all these measures that were taken in place to help address the pandemic, stay at home, closing down of businesses, it effectively means that, you know, people are not buying as many goods and services in general. And so this is going to have ripple effects across all the economies. You've also had a retrenchment in trade, in global trade, which is affecting many countries. For Africa in particular, one of the big things that has affected us adversely in this has been a drop in commodity prices. I'm sure everyone saw what happened in the news, where the price of oil, not only did the price of oil drop so low, but there was literally no storage facility to keep the oil. And so for the first time that we've ever seen in modern stock market history, people were paying others to take the oil off their hands. So the price of oil actually became negative in the futures market, meaning that people were literally saying, I will pay you to be able to take this oil for free, which I think is a great metaphor for the sorts of times we're in. This is a time of extreme uncertainty and a time of very real economic devastation, with no clear sense of what is the end in sight. Are we going to have a second wave? There's no clear answer. We are not very clear on what's going on here. What we do know on the medical side is how to survive individually to a certain degree. We have all these, medical outfits and public health officials and so on and so forth that has told us what we need to do to survive. Wear your masks, have your sanitizers, socially distance, stock up on food and water, monitor yourself for the symptoms. And so from a personal perspective, it's clear what we need to do to make sure that, you know, we're being smart and Corona does not get the better of us. But for our small and medium enterprises, for our businesses, do we have a survival kit? Do we have a clear sense of what we need to do to ensure that we get through this economic turbulence and we make it to the other side, that we actually survive? And so I wanted to share a few thoughts and a few ideas around not only how can you survive this, but how can you leverage this period as an opportunity to do something different and to use it as a way to pivot and to perhaps even thrive beyond just surviving. The first thing is keep calm and cash is king. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. And I'm sure Antoinette, the veteran banker, will be able to give, you know, the more specific details on managing the finances and what to do. So save all the hard questions for her. But I had, there's a company that I'm an investor in, and they called me when this crisis happened and said, what do we do? So I sat down with the entrepreneur and we started mapping out things. And the first thing I said was, look, the most important thing you have to recognize about this is sales and revenues and all that stuff is vanity. It all boils down to cash and how the business is going to survive. So this is very much a cash thing. And so what I advised him and what I advise all other businesses to do is to really map out your cash in terms of how much cash do you have on your balance sheet today? How long is that cash going to last you in terms of covering your expenses for the business, right? When are you going to run out of cash? And you need to actually today start to, you can't, the one thing I always tell all my portfolio companies is hope is not a strategy. Hope is one of those things you can hope for good things to happen and you can hope you get a Christmas present, but in business, hope is not a strategy. You actually need to have a clear plan in place, which means that you need to go down and say, so before President lifted the lockdown, part of your planning has to be, what if we don't have the lockdown, right? Lifted. What if the lockdown is extended? What if this goes on for 3 months? You actually need to model out these scenarios to get a sense of what do you do in your business? How much cash do you have? How long is that cash going to last you? You need to go through your expenses. And you literally need to be able to figure out, are there any costs in there that can be deferred? Right? Are there any costs there that you don't have to pay today? Are there, because at the end of the most important thing you have in any crisis like this is cash. Cash is your most precious commodity. And it's the one thing that's going to make a difference between whether you survive or whether you don't. And so you want to be very thoughtful about how you manage your cash expenses and how you can, in some ways, defer some of any expenses you need to incur. How can you defer that into the future? So that's the first important thing, important principle is cash is king. And cash is the single most important thing that's going to determine whether you survive or whether they bring out the Ghanaian pallbearers to do the dance for your business, as I'm sure we've all seen on social media. But beyond that, I don't know if you guys remember this adapt or die, which this came out of the whole, this lean startup ideology that if you're a startup and you don't adapt to changes, you die, right? Or if you're a business and you don't adapt, you die. And you've seen that happen to even great giants. I remember at the time, maybe 10 years ago or so, prior to, so I'd say maybe about 15 years ago, there was a time where BlackBerry was like the biggest dog on the block, and Nokia was the biggest phone company, and those were the dominant ones. And if you told me at that time that BlackBerry, no one would really be using BlackBerry, I wouldn't even believe it. Yet because they failed to adapt to competitive threats from Apple, and they failed to adapt to changes in consumer behavior and the growth and the shift from corporations who typically used to use BlackBerry because it was the best on security, and eventually consumer behavior forced them to change, they died effectively. And so this is a similar period. And I wanted to quickly share examples from two of our portfolio companies that I think have done a great job in terms of adapting to this crisis. The first is Jetstream, which is a tech-enabled logistics company that mostly before was focused on exports. And Miche, who's the CEO, Miche in Ghana, when the crisis happened, she realized that, look, people are not exporting as much. I mean, we literally had restrictions on stuff. People could not export as much. But she realized that there is a rush for people to now stock up on stuff because we're worried about supplies, you're worried about inventory, you're worried about making sure you have enough stock on hand for various businesses. And so what she then did was immediately reach out to those relationships in China and stocked up there to make sure that she could change her business model from one focus on exports to one that's now focused on imports, bringing things in. And that was how she was able to, quite frankly, save her business, because her export business dropped significantly. But she was able to grow her overall business by pivoting. Another portfolio company, Rabito, also did a similar thing where in the midst of the crisis, nobody wants to go to hospitals or clinics unless it's very critical. And so they saw foot traffic plummet significantly. And they said, you know, this is a chance for us to really push telemedicine and for us to make sure that we're kind of pushing e-health business. And so they did that, where they pushed that, and you've seen that mitigates the drop down in foot traffic, where they create these virtual consultations with their doctors. They literally send someone in hazmat suits to come and take your blood samples and any lab samples that's needed. And then over SMS, you kind of get, you're told this is what your condition is, and they'll deliver the drugs to you. So it's a way in which they've been able to adapt to the pandemic and to figure out how do you still deliver your service, how do you still create value for your customers, even when you have such a situation like this. And beyond, but that's one level, right, of just saying that, okay, I'm faced with all these issues, how do I adapt to survive? But what I want to push and encourage everyone to use this period to also do is to go beyond that. If, for those of you who are familiar with Ghana, if you remember this spot, this is airport, you know, when you just come from, this picture was taken at some time in the late 90s. And you almost can't recognize it when you look at it, but this is how that area used to be. And a picture was taken of the same area 10 years later, right? And a part of this is, to me, what's very interesting is, I always ask myself that the guys in the cars in this picture, did they ever imagine that we're actually going to see what we saw next in the next picture? Were they able to really, wait, can you guys all see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, and so the question I always had was, could people actually imagine and see what this would look like? And so the exercise that I also want all of you to do is to imagine the future. This is a time to not just figure out how do you pivot and how do you adapt to survive, but actually imagine the future. Take a pen and pad and scope out and write out, how is this going to change how we live? Because in every disruption, value is destroyed, but value is also created. And so you want to be able to figure out, how do you capture the pockets of value that will be created as a result of this? And it's incredible when you put your mind to imagination to figure out how you can do this. I am a judge for, so Oxford has launched this innovation competition around COVID-19. And I'm a judge for it. And I looked through the applications yesterday to score them. And I was amazed at some of the sorts of innovation people were coming up with. Someone realized with this issue we're dealing with, and someone said, well, in most places, they have the hand sanitizer, and then you have the exits for the door. Maybe, you know, you put your hand or whatever, just contactless for the door to exit. They created this prototype where they combined it. So they put the door exit thing inside the hand sanitizer. So if you don't sanitize your hand, you can't exit the door, right? And it's such a brilliant innovation if you think about it, right? Because it's one clear way to ensure that, well, nobody's leaving any of these doors, entering or exiting, without sanitizing themselves. And so that's just one of many different ways in which I think you can, if you imagine the future and imagine what is going to be the result of this, how is our world going to fundamentally change? You're going to see incredible areas for you to capture value. One way to do this that I think everyone should be doing and spending time, especially SMEs, is customer discovery. You want to be talking to your customers. This is a time where you want to get close to your customers. You want to understand what their pain points are, what are they going through in a period like this, and you want to be able to better understand what their situation is, so that you can think then about how can you pivot, how can you imagine the future, how can you figure out solutions or new solutions that could create a ton of value for them, right? And so it is very, very, very important for you to do customer discovery. It's important for you to spend a lot of time calling your customers, speaking to your customers. And this is not selling. This is just trying to understand what challenges are you going through? Because by being able to fully understand the challenges that they are going through, and by being able to fully understand their pain points, you will be able to create solutions to those things, and you'll be able to create greater resiliency in your business. I'm sharing this picture because when most people look at what we built at Golden Palm Investments, they think of our portfolio, which involves some of the leading tech companies across the continent, Flutterwave, M-Pharma, and Delle, and all these great businesses. But what's funny is that it was almost accidental that we went into VC, because it was a crisis that took us there. A similar macroeconomic crisis during the global financial crisis, where we basically saw our first project when I first started Golden Palm. We invested in corn farms. And there was a crisis, a massive macroeconomic crisis, and the depreciation of 30 to 40% of the local currency that forced us to then say, okay, we can't put all our eggs in one basket. And so the lessons from that crisis and the push to solve for that crisis, and saying that how do we diversify exposure, right? How do we make sure that we're not, we don't have an existential threat because one thing goes wrong, is what's eventually evolved and us being able to create the portfolio we currently have today. And so I say that to also encourage you to say that apart from just imagining the future, doing customer discovery, take your pain points and what you're struggling with today. So literally put a list of your own pain points as well, and try and come up with solutions for those pain points, because those solutions will be able to create greater resiliency for you in the business down the road. And it will serve you very well as you look to scale. And finally, what I also want to share and encourage all of you is, in general, being an entrepreneur is a very, 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 very difficult road. It's a lonely road, but exacerbated by COVID-19, staying at home, working from home, we've already started to see evidence that it's taken a huge toll on mental health. And so it's something that I also want to really encourage people that at the end of the day, cash is king. But the only asset greater than cash in a time like this is you. You are the greatest asset to your business. And if you cannot function at your best, and if you cannot do well at your best, I mean, your business is not really going to survive. And so for your business to survive, for your business to do well, for your business to expand, for your business to get past this crisis, for your business to take advantage of this crisis and imagine the future and pivot, you need to survive. You need to thrive. And so it's really, 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 really important for you all to take care of yourselves, pay a lot of attention to your mental health, and recognize that entrepreneurs are at a higher risk for these sorts of things. I've been through this. You can watch my talk where I openly talk about the challenges I face when I had my own crisis for my business. And I really encourage all of you to be more open and to be more vulnerable about it, because taking care of yourself is what's going to allow you to eventually take care of your business. With that, I'll end here. I'm happy to take questions, and I'll just end on my last slide, which has, it's the cutest picture of myself I could find, so I decided to share it. Happy to take questions.
Oh, Sangu, you're so cute. Thank you so much. So guys, please keep your questions coming in, because we really want to keep this as interactive as possible, as engaging as possible. So Sangu, I wanted to find out from you what your thoughts were on how you feel the market will change in terms of investment. You've obviously invested heavily in SMEs across the continent. How do you think, what kind of SME profile would you find attractive given the new world that we're entering into? What kind of characteristics would you be looking for specifically at this time and post-COVID?
So I think the pandemic has introduced a number of paradigm shifts, right? The first paradigm shift which is really quite critical, has been an acceleration of the shift to digital, right? And so there was a joke meme that I saw on Instagram where it was reasons for immediate shift to digital, and one was my CEO told me to, two was blah blah blah, and then the last answer was COVID-19, right? And I think for a lot of businesses, there has been, you necessarily have had to shift to digital just to be able to operate, period, in a time like this, where you can't really have a lot of face-to-face. And so I think one big theme that we've refined in a lot of our investments and in looking, when we look to invest in companies, has been how far are they on the shift to digital? And can they adapt in a digitized environment? Because we foresee that this is not just a one-time disruption, but we're probably going to live, a world with pandemics could be the new normal, right? And so that's one important thing. The second thing that's quite critical is it's a new thing we now model out for, which is to say, how adaptable is a business to a pandemic? So effectively, how essential is your goods or service? And so I think that the closer you are to serving fundamental needs, critical needs, to the extent you're not just on the luxury end of things, or you're not just on the nice to have, the more critical you can become to your consumer, whether that's whether you're B2C or B2B, the more critical you can become, the more needed you can become, the stickier you are. Those things, I think, are now growing of greater importance in our analysis. And this is something that I actually think benefits African startups more so than global startups, is your ability to survive. And I say that because I think a lot of startups, especially a lot of startups that I've invested in the US and the UK, because of the venture environment, are more used to just keep running losses and you just keep raising capital. And then when the tap stops, the whole game changes. I mean, we've even seen this happen at the scale of WeWork, where the pressure they're under. So there's greater pressure now for models that are already profitable or have a clear path to profitability, which I think already is something that's advantageous for African startups, because we don't have the same venture ecosystem. So you already know that if you can't just keep running losses in perpetuity. No one is going to bail you out in that.
Bail you out, yeah. Bankruptcy is real, right? We don't have. I mean, I think we have some new chapters, sort of bankruptcy laws in Ghana in particular, but the safety net isn't necessarily there. So in terms of mindset, I mean, you talked a lot about mental health, but what would you think are your top tips, or what would you say your top tips were for that kind of survival mentality?
Right. And so the first thing I actually say is, and that's why I'll kind of go back to the keep calm, is the reason it's quite important is, if you panic, you're not going to make good decisions. And there's a lot of scholarship that's around this. So you actually need to be able to calm down, and then you actually need to be able to model out the issues, right? So you need to take a step back and really fully understand what the situation is. So number one, you need to start off and understand how much cash do you have, right? So if you're sitting on 20,000 CDs, what does that mean? What's your burn rate? So the entrepreneur that I mentioned I worked with, I'll use illustrative numbers. But effectively, before, he was looking at a situation where he was panicking because he was going to run out of cash in 2 months. And so we worked together where we laid out how much cash do you have, what are the expenses, what's needed, what's not needed. We renegotiated certain things. We cut everything that wasn't necessary. I mean, we basically ended up being able to now stretch what would have just lasted for 2 months. We were able to stretch it for 6 months. Right? So at least he now knows that I have a 6-month horizon to just survive. Right. And then on top of that, now that when you solve that, it now gives you a bit of breathing room to now be able to figure out, okay, how do I bring in new business? And so I actually caught up with him last week. He was able to get a small contract, but that small contract from an old customer where he did customer discovery. So he found out that, okay, my customer maybe before my customer was buying 10,000 C's worth of services, but I figured out this problem they're having. I'm able to pivot. We pivoted. Okay, they might not do 10,000, they might now do 4,000, but that 4,000 now is giving him maybe an extra 2 months of runway, right? And so it's kind of taking it from that standpoint and managing it appropriately. So that's, I think those things are really, really critical to make sure that you're, but you need to have the granular details and the numbers to actually understand what you're dealing with.
Okay, and for the entrepreneur who has seen their revenues dry up overnight and has zero reserves, the worst case scenario, how should they rebuild? Great.
So to me, for an entrepreneur, so take, let's use a clear example. My dear friend who runs Kaime, right?
Oh, Frida.
Hi, Frida's revenues down 95%.
Yeah.
Right? Completely devastating from that perspective. But I think what she did brilliantly has been to build the brand and go offensively and even the very act of saying that, look, I'm not going to lay off my workers in a time. I think she was able to build so much goodwill that I know friends, and I have friends who have now said, I don't need it, but I'm just going to order kind.
Yeah.
Right? Because I love and I love what's being supported here. So I think that in a time where you've seen your revenues plummet, there are a number of things you can do. One of the things is to really focus on what can you do with building your brand, right? And associating goodwill with the brand. The second is how can you pivot, right? So how can you, and this is where you actually need to map out. You need to map out what is COVID-19 doing. It's not just destroying value, it's also creating value. It's creating a need for certain things. So how can you take advantage of some of those things given what you have? I explained Jetstream was focused mostly on exports. They realized that now in a time of COVID-19, people want to import stuff more. So they quickly changed around there and said, instead of talking to people about exports, let's switch and let's go and look at people who need to import and let's pivot with respect to that. M-Pharma saw that there was also going to be a massive decline in the core business, right? And so what they did was they said, well, people are struggling to get COVID-19 related medications, face masks, all those things. So they said, we still have our warehouse, we still have our infrastructure. Let's pivot that infrastructure to use it for these other things. And so what I would say in that case is you need to think through what can you do with your existing infrastructure that you have. So if your existing business is down that significantly, are there other things you can still do to be able to survive? And the other thing that's also very important is rationalizing your cost structure. Are there things on your expenses? Because if your revenue is zero and your cost is zero, you're fine. But what often kills a lot of these guys is your revenue is zero, your cost is still pretty high, and then you have a low cash balance. And so you literally can't survive. The math doesn't add up. So you need to figure out what are the different ways in which you can cut on costs. Anything that's non-essential can be cut. Anything that can be deferred. Is there ways with even employees? Are there ways, as much as possible, I always say, look, these are tough times and you don't want to be able to lay off, but are there conversations you can have around, look, what's the minimum you need to survive and defer the rest, right? Because are there compromises you can reach to kind of be able to help you just stretch it as far as possible? And I've seen, there's one business I know, for example, that the employees went into a voluntary agreement with a small business where they said, look, we'll take half, we'll take 50% off through this period, just so we can survive.
Right. I think we've seen this theme throughout several of the other conversations we've been having the past month, just really communicating with your customers and your stakeholders, your client, your staff especially, to let them know how things are going and just be truthful with them to let them know what's at stake. And you find that they're very supportive. So be open and transparent, I think, is the key thing in terms of communication with your staff. Olivia, do you have any questions from the...
There is one from Christopher Money. It says, with most of the cloud infrastructure currently situated outside Africa, are we not prone to disruptions and exposed? How do we go about building cloud services based in Africa? Is there an appetite for this?
Right. So, Christopher, thank you for the question. Well, a couple of things I'll share there is, I'm not sure it's just the cloud infrastructure that's situated outside the continent, right? I mean, I can't think of any email you're using or the Zoom you're speaking to me on. Most of the tech infrastructure we use, quite frankly, is situated outside the continent. But for people's data, there is that concern, maybe for businesses and so on and so forth. I've actually seen on my desk, we had a number of different, over the last few years, a number of different pitches for people who are trying to build data centers locally. South Africa, of course, already has some. There are a number of them that are based in South Africa. But outside South Africa, ex-South Africa and outside North Africa also has some. You have some in North Africa. There have been some people who've been trying to do that. The key and the challenge really is around the capex involved there, right? And what your pricing is going to be. And can you actually come up with a value proposition that will make it at the margin more compelling than paying Microsoft or paying Amazon to basically host my stuff. And so that's, I think there probably could still be room for that, especially for more sensitive things, like whether it's healthcare data or maybe national security data or something of the sort. So it's something that you could pursue, but the only things that you're going to have to really figure out is how you can rationalize the costs in a way that will make the value proposition compelling, given that you're going to have significant capex to it.
I think that's all the questions we have from the audience right now. If you have any further questions, please let us know. But I think these are the questions that we have so far.
Thanks so much, Sangu. I have one other question which will link us to Antoinette. Antoinette and I were talking the other day about the fact that, people are still at this moment in time alone. And I said, of course, I doubt banks are lending right now, right? I think that's a bit of a luxury at this time. So a lot of the conversations we have with investors and people in the ecosystem has spoken to the fact that, historically we've been very reliant on external funding into our businesses without really looking at our fundamental business models, right? So in terms of, profitability in mind as inherent part of your business model, what would you say would be your top tips for encouraging SMEs and entrepreneurs across the continent to be more focused on the customer? Because as you said, cash is king, right? How do you identify that customer that would actually, pay you in a way that will cover your costs and give you the profitability from as early a stage as possible, rather than relying on external funding? What would be your top tip on that front? And then we can transition to Antoinette, the big banker. So Antoinette, please get ready for your conversation with us.
I think, look, at the end of the day, the greatest validation for any business model is a paying customer. And so that's why I think the customer discovery process is actually incredibly important, because a lot of times you'd be surprised how many businesses, there's so many businesses and entrepreneurs I'll talk to who will come with an idea, but the idea is an idea they've thought of, right? As opposed to an idea that is based on a customer discovery process that actually understands what are the pain points that customers are going through, and that's solving a problem that's so serious that a customer is saying, like, I will pay to solve this. And that becomes one fundamental flaw I see in a lot of the business models. That's why one of the questions I always ask entrepreneurs in any business they're doing is, what problem are you solving? And to me, that's the starting point. Because if you're solving a problem and you can create a business model around that problem where someone is paying you for that solution, not only do you create an opportunity for someone to pay you for that business, but you also create a competitive moat, right? Because it's real. It's not just a nice to have, but you're actually solving a problem. And so that's a starting point that I think it's very important. And I think someone just put, is this the best time to start a business of your own? Look, some of the greatest businesses in the world were started during the global financial crisis. And you go and look at them, whether it's your Airbnbs. I mean, there's some extraordinary businesses that have been created. And what I always say is, any business that is able to be created and or survive now will actually be able to thrive when things go well. And there's actually a lot of scholarship on this, where we did some research on consumer companies that were publicly traded, and we realized that during these critical times, you saw a compression of margins. But the ones who were able to adapt and were actually able to, grow market share and take advantage of the chaos, post-crisis, they had a massive expansion in margins that were larger than the margins prior to even the crisis, because you're able to learn how to build operations leaner, you're nimbler, and by definition, you're more adaptable. And so as difficult as this time is, I keep saying that value will be destroyed, but value will also be created. And so this is a time for out-of-the-box thinking and creative imaginations.
So as an investor, would you go for mass market kind of consumer-facing SMEs or niche, like a niche, in terms of the environment at the moment, the marketplace, consumer behavior, what would you go for?
It really depends, right? It really depends. It depends on the product, because niche that is, critical, high purchase price, sticky, in some ways works very well, right? Of course, mass market, you have your embedded advantages in that, right? Where you kind of don't have the same concentration risk problems, but it really depends on the product, the pricing. It'll really depend. I don't think I can give a blanket one or the other. I think the devil is always in the details.
It's a complex answer and a complex question. And I had another question to escape me now. Any other questions, Olivia? I just had a question.
Sorry, yes. Actually, it dovetails quite nicely into a question that one of the our attendees have asked. And it's from, I'm so sorry, I can't pronounce your name. Says, the issue of pivoting, is it a sound strategy to pivot when the outlook is still uncertain? And it goes into details. They take, for instance, Farm Crowdy and Hubtail. They have now redirected resources into e-commerce space, and Market Jumia is struggling to turn a profit. There's a risk that consumer behavior might revert back to pre-COVID patterns, which may cause problems. So when is it best to pivot, and what should one consider?
Look, I think it's a very fair question, right? But first principle, which is you need to survive. And so if your existing business model, right, if you don't have cash on balance sheet to be able to survive through this crisis, and your existing business model is simply not generating anything, right, that's going to allow you to sustain the business, you don't have a choice, right? You effectively have to experiment and pivot and figure out, you have to adapt or you die, right? That's just the fundamental reality of the situation that I think a lot of these businesses are faced with. So in terms of what should one consider, you need to consider cash on your balance sheet and your runway. And so if you have significant cash on balance sheet, and let's say you have runway for 6 months or longer, then you're in a bit of a comfortable space where you can kind of, manage through the process and just try and optimize as best as you can. But if you're in a situation where you're going to run out of cash and your business is just not going to survive, it's, as a going concern, there are real challenges there, then quite frankly, I don't think you have the luxury to worry about what happens if there's a reversion back to pre-COVID, because your business won't be alive, right? And so you will necessarily have to pivot and figure things out. If you are in the first scenario and you still want to pivot to take advantage of things, I think from that perspective, it really just becomes, how many resources are you diverting to that, and what's your risk reward on that, right? And so if I'm diverting 10% of my resources into this pivot, and this pivot, if I get it right, could have the potential to maybe contribute, create a new business line that could increase my run rate revenues by 40%, then it's worth it from a risk reward perspective. And so those are some of the considerations I think I would factor in.
Okay, there's one last question before we move off from Prince Wedu. And he says, to what extent are business models going to be disrupted in the era of COVID-19? I think we kind of covered a number of
Yeah.
areas.
I think you're going to see lots of disruptions. I think there's going to be some businesses that will just fundamentally be changed. I think you're going to see, you're already, I spoke earlier about some of the paradigm shifts. You're already starting to see a massive shift in digitization and the move towards digitization across the board. I think you're going to continue to see a shift in that. I think you're also going to see a fundamental shift in prioritization. So healthcare and healthcare verticals and healthcare related verticals, you're going to see huge benefits there with respect to that. So there are going to be some disruptions. Not all of them are going to be negative. Some of them are going to be positive. And the key really is to model out the sectors that will actually do very well in times like this. Like, look, if you were focused on food delivery in a time like this, for example, this was a great time, great boon to the business. And there are so if I take Rabito's e-health business, for example, it's not going to go away in a post-COVID world. In fact, I think that because a lot of people have now used it and gotten used to it and like it, because it's quite frankly more convenient, it's changing the adoption curve. And so I think for some of these businesses, you're going to have this COVID-19 is just going to create an opportunity for people to shift their behavior. And I think some of that behavior is actually going to persist in a post-COVID environment.
I agree. Thank you so much, Sangu. Those are all the questions that we have at the moment. Really great coverage in terms of how people can pivot and kind of think around their mindset during a time like this. We're going to dovetail quite nicely to speak to the big banker from Absa, Antoinette Kwofie. Antoinette, if you're online, we are ready for you. Thank you so much, Sangu. We'll be back to you very soon.
Thank you all. Thanks so much. I remember all the hard questions from my
Sangu, you better stay online.
Hi, Antoinette. Please introduce yourself and let's start off the conversation.
Hi, thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Amma. And thank you, Sangu. I think Sangu has pretty much said everything. My name is Antoinette Kwofie, and I'm the Executive Director of Finance in Absa Bank Ghana. We are a bank that's particularly interested in the SME space. And those of you who follow me on LinkedIn have probably seen that I am a strong believer in the SME, in the African dream. And I believe that SMEs are the lifeline. And so I'm looking forward to see how SMEs take advantage of this chaos, because believe it or not, in the midst of chaos, there is extreme opportunity. Also, my mom told me many years ago. So having said that, I'm not going to give a presentation. I've agreed to have a conversation of sorts with Olivia and Amma. So back to you, ladies.
Thanks so much, Antoinette. It's good to see you, and thanks for making time to join us. But I think the first question would be, as the representative from big business and big banking, what kind of requirements have you seen from your customers, and how are you addressing those as a private sector player? Because I know you guys contributed to the COVID fund and the National Fund for COVID response. You donated to that fund, but as an organization, within your organization, how are you serving your SMEs, and what are the key requirements at the moment?
Okay, thank you. So as an organization, yes, like you rightly said, we contributed to the COVID fund. We are also engaging, a lot has changed in the way we do business, actually. Everyone has to adapt, not just SMEs. We have changed the way we work, the way we engage customers, the way we engage as colleagues, etc. We are more flexible in the way we work. And we are looking to support our businesses a lot more. And the SME area is an area where we are offering a lot of support. We are offering moratoriums, and this is to help solve part of the problem which Sangu spoke about. One of the best lessons I was taught when I started learning accounting was that cash is king, and the SMEs need cash to survive. In actual fact, in these times, as he said, the most important thing is survival, and the cash is a very thin line between survival and folding up. And so we are offering this moratorium to help the customers. We're doing principal moratoriums and as well as interest and principal moratoriums, just to ease cash flow for the SME area and for other customers, and to help them to provide more liquidity to their businesses so they can get through this period without suffering too much. So that's the key thing we're doing in the customer area.
And what do you look out for when you're, is this like a blanket offer that you're offering as Absa, or are you doing it on a case-by-case basis based on the book and the record keeping of the SME? What would you look out for to offer such a moratorium or other services like that at this time?
Okay, so Amma, it's very much based on a case-by-case basis. We have said to our customers, engage us, let us know if you need support. And a lot of them have actually approached us. We have people who say, I can still afford to meet interest payments. So all I need is a principal moratorium for, we've offered from all the way up to 6 months. Some have asked for 3 months, some have, remember, we're in a very fluid situation. And so people don't necessarily know how long this is going to last for.
Yeah, you can't
it's about exactly. It's about maintaining the flexibility and keeping the engagements going. Our relationship managers are engaging very closely with the customers to identify what the key and core needs are so that we provide appropriate support. If you go, because one thing I'd like to say is that all these moratoriums are not debt forgiveness or interest forgiveness. It actually, you would actually bear the expense later. All we're doing is to freeing up cash flow. So for those businesses like pharmaceuticals, etc., who are seeing a lot of cash inflows and who do not need that support, they may not ask for it. We're just engaging to understand what matters to each customer and what they need, what their needs are, and providing adequate support. It seems Amma has been frozen out. Olivia, do you want to take over? Do you want me to?
Back. Sorry, I'm back.
All right.
I'm back. Did you have a question, Olivia?
No, I was literally going to just get clarity on the word that we're using, auditorium. What does that actually mean? Just so everyone's clear in terms of actually.
Sure.
Okay, sure. My son always tells me go Google, but from let me say it from a layman's point of view. He says, "Mommy, don't you have the answer? Google." Anyway, it's mainly what a moratorium offers you is a period where it's almost like a freeze period where you do not have to make payments. So where you have a principal moratorium, what it says is that, when you take a loan, you are expected to make a payment on that bulk, on that principal, that core loan that you've taken. In addition to that, the fund providers also charge you interest on that. So what we say when we give you a moratorium is that we're giving you a time period during which you either don't make payments, you don't pay down this principal, or you make our interest payments, or in actual fact, because you're so cash strapped, you don't make any payments at all for a period of about 3 to 6 months. And after that, when your business is in a better position to meet these payments, then you begin making them.
So when they're able to make these payments back, is there a higher interest rate charge, or how does it work? Because you're spreading clearly over the next, say, for example, 3 months, depending on how long this thing lasts for. If you're giving that opportunity to freeze on any kind of payments because there isn't enough funds coming in, when things kind of level out, do you then spread? I just want to get an understanding of, like, as an SME, do you then have to worry about how much more you have to pay over a longer period of time? How does that work?
Okay, and this is why every SME needs to engage their bank, because like I said, it's like on a case-by-case basis. What happens in all cases is that this amount is just held, and when you start making payments, there will be a restructuring of sorts. It's either you make higher payments every month over the same remaining tenor, or you make the same payments you were making before, but over a longer tenor. All in all, yes, the idea is that you will make whatever you owe over. It's just that you're making it over a separate tenor and not during this time when it's frozen.
Yeah.
And the reason I ask SMEs to engage is that it's very, you need to make sure, a lot of people, when they hear of moratoriums, and I've engaged with a few customers and I've realized it's not always clear, is people think that no interest is applied in the interim, but you need to clarify with your bank that that's exactly what they are offering you. Because in most instances, during the period that you are not paying, interest will continue to accrue, except that you do not pay until the end of the moratorium period, be it 3 months or 6 months. And at that point in time, you will start making payments to cover both your principal, your outstanding principal, and your outstanding interest at that point in time.
Okay.
Are you guys lending at the moment? Are you commissioning new loans for people who are applying?
Yes, we are.
Existing. Okay, so you are. You're lending.
Yeah, we are. Well, like I said, and Sangu said, in the midst of chaos, there are loads of opportunities.
Of course, of course.
If the risk profile is right, and if you are convinced about what the customer is using it for, and you believe that it would generate adequate flows in order to pay off, yes, you do. So we are actually, my loan book is actually growing.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So maybe you can share a little bit about what kind of proposal you like to see. What kind of characteristics would you look out for?
Okay, so
excited.
Yeah, yeah. Before I give you what we'll look out for, I'd like to say that we've highlighted several times on this webinar that cash is king. I would not advise at this point in time that SMEs go take out loans for, let's say, to build a new factory or something like that for capital expenditure. For now, you need to conserve as much money as you can. So really what I would ask SMEs to do is to engage their banks to see if there's some kind of temporary arrangement, like a short-term overdraft facility to help you if you're not getting enough cash in, etc. So just so you have enough liquidity during the period, in addition to any moratorium that you have. And also you need to look at engaging, you need to almost increase your cash inflows and limit your cash outflows. And try and survive less on significant loans at this point in time, because loans can only exacerbate your problems at this point in time, especially if you're using it in something that you're not too sure about. The areas so what we look out for is, like I said, the risk profile of the organization. And one issue we have with some SMEs is the fact is bookkeeping. It always comes up, bookkeeping. A lot of SMEs do not necessarily have great bookkeeping practices. And what that does is it makes it difficult for an organization to assess the true health of your business. And if I cannot establish the health of your business, I might not be willing to fund it. Yeah. So actually maintaining good bookkeeping practices is key to getting any funding from anyone, be it a bank or any other investor. And also, you need to make sure that the business actually works, the business model works. At this point in time, we all know that businesses have kind of slowed down over the period, but there are certain businesses that are thriving. And so I have a customer example who deals with mother care, right? And all she did before, she had a website, but it didn't do too much on the website, didn't pay too much attention. Just did more sales in the shop. You should see in the past month, she's done more sales online than she has in her shop because she realized what we're going through. She enhanced her online offering and she made sure that her website was enhanced. There's a lot of work going on around her website. She has a delivery person. So you actually select and she delivers. And that has seen her survive. And actually her business has done better in the last month than it had in the 3 months before that. I also have, and I know somebody asked around pivoting. And SMEs need to think critically and apply some pivoting in these times. I have a customer who deals in ethanol. Usually his normal business was providing this ethanol for the production of alcoholic beverages.
Okay.
Obviously, well, I say so. I'm not sure if it's completely true now that there's no lockdown. I believe the consumption of alcoholic beverages may not necessarily be at the same levels they were before the COVID crisis. This person has not gone out of business. He's providing this, the ethanol, to companies to make sanitizers with. He's still in business. So this is a business that when I look at it and I look at the model, I know it's sustainable. And so I'll be willing to put money in. You understand? So I think those are just a couple of examples that I'll give on businesses that have, I also have maybe one last example. And it's important at this time that SMEs also take note of the fact that it's okay to have partnerships. It will help you sail through this a lot easier. I have a customer who has a factory that wasn't operating at full capacity. During COVID, it's become even more difficult. Actually, in the last month or so, in the last 6 weeks, he's gone into a partnership with somebody else who needed capacity, factory capacity to produce pharmaceutical products. And so now it's a win-win. He's getting, his factory space is being utilized. He's getting in some cash to help sustain his side of the business. And then he's helping somebody else also thrive. And so if I see something like this, I am more likely to invest or fund such a business.
Excellent, excellent. So some of us have a very bad habit of not repaying loans. So we've had a notoriously bad period of non-performing loans and high rates of non-performing loans. So, I mean, how do you as a big bank manage that? I mean, you know, in terms of, sorry, there's some feedback at the moment. How do you as a bank manage that at a time like this where we're in crisis, there are a lot of businesses in distress? How do you manage that particular risk of non-performing loans beyond described, because, you know, cash thinking and inflows and partnerships and stuff like that? Are there any differences in the way that you're managing that in terms of internal process?
Okay, to tell you the truth, and I know you would agree with me that nobody will give money that they're not going to get back. I'm sure Sangu doesn't invest in businesses that won't generate a return. So if the risk profile is important, if you have a history of not paying back loans you've taken in the past, chances are in times of crisis, nobody is going to support you. Or if they do, it will be structured in such a way that it doesn't give you a lot of leeway not to repay. So I would advise, and when you speak to the general banking community, this tends to come up a lot. And we have engaged with central bank among other areas where government wants banks to invest and fund the SME sector. And banks who have had their fingers bent are reluctant to do that. So it's absolutely important that you repay loans when you take them. And you know, bankers are humans as well. If you have real challenges, that means that for a period, you need support not to make the same payments that you used to. I believe that have the conversation, and we have a lot of those conversations, Amma, with our customers, where the customer says, you know what, in actual fact, my business is not going as well as it's supposed to, and so I'm not generating enough funds to meet the repayments. And we engage them and we will restructure the loan to either give you a longer tenor to pay back or put some measures in place to help you, to make you more psyched up or better placed to repay your loans. But repayment is one key thing, that repayment experience or history is one key thing that most banks will look out for before they support you.
Interesting you mentioned around kind of short-term overdrafts to help and support SMEs during kind of if they have really terrible cash flow because of the situation we're currently going in. Is there any policy that's been put in place or maybe will be put in place with, you know, from Bank of Ghana or kind of from a conglomerate of all the different banks to say, we're going to take lead in terms of reducing rates to help SMEs with short-term overdrafts to support kind of their cash flow, for example? Is there any kind of policy that's being put together that is likely to support them?
Actually, central bank reduced their policy rates at the beginning of all this. I think end of March, early April, and banks have been in discussion with central banks to reduce interest rates to the general public. And for example, in Absa Bank, we have reduced our interest rates by 200 basis points, and in some instances more, to our customers. And I know that the SME area is one of the key areas that we targeted, because the whole idea is not to make it more difficult for customers to repay. And so where the cost of funds allows, because remember, these funds we are on lending, we also pick from the market. And so where the cost of funds allows, yes, we have reduced even further than 200 basis points, but everybody has had a minimum of 200 basis points reduction in their interest rates.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So Antoinette, this is kind of a big question. It's more of an ideas question, but what do you think the future of banking in Ghana or Africa will look like in the next 2 years? And what is Absa doing to maybe lead the way in that regard, to make banking more accessible to individuals as well as SMEs?
Okay. I was saying to someone the other day that I'm sure every company has a business continuity plan where they had crisis simulations, etc. But I don't think anybody ever foresaw a situation like COVID. Okay, so we didn't expect it to be anything to ever happen to be this drastic. It has come, and what it's done is it's actually challenged the way we do business. It's challenged the way we actually think. And I see, well, Sangu mentioned the digital bit, and I think banks had already started on this journey, on the digital bit. I think it will get even more critical during the next year or two to make sure that digital channels are easily accessible, and accessible not just to customers, but there will be products that actually make digital channels accessible to the mass market. I mean, when mobile money first started, I don't think anybody expected that at any point in time we'll have more flows going through the mobile money network than you have deposits in banks.
Right.
But that's where we are.
That's where we are. Right.
Yeah, that's where we are. So we're thinking outside the box. The idea is more digital engagements. Like I said at the very beginning, we've started even our customer engagements. We are having more video calls, more online engagements, etc. And what I believe is that, and yesterday I saw someone say on LinkedIn that she saw the president of Ghana in an AU meeting using Zoom or something, some online channel.
Right.
And that she can imagine how much cost have been saved. Yeah. And I made a comment that COVID has taught us a lot of possibilities that we wouldn't otherwise have thought about. And as human as we are, my prayer is that we keep remembering this when the crisis is over. I believe that the business models that we run across all sectors is going to change. Banking has changed. I mean, half my branch network was closed for a month. We still went on and we banked. So we are putting more measures in place to make sure that within or without COVID, we are able to do business no matter what happens. And that's what is going to be the play of most banks going forward. Digital, yes, in every way. And it will be in colleague engagement, it will be in customer engagement, it will be in sales, it will cut across the entire business end to end. But for us, as you know,
you talked about collaboration as well.
Yeah.
You talked about collaboration as well. How are the big banks collaborating with fintech? We've had a very interesting a big announcement from BTing who we had on last.
Okay.
Now has a mobile banking license for banks to operate in that space. So how are you guys collaborating?
we do collaborate a lot. Obviously.
Antoinette, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, Amma?
Yes,
Olivia,
I can hear you. I think Amma's having some problems with connection. I can hear you.
Yes.
It's a bit choppy, but it's okay.
Yeah. I think she was asking about collaboration. And I think collaboration is essential in every part of our business. For us in Absa, we've had collaboration and strategic partnerships as one of our key strategic pillars over the past few years. And actually in the SME area, we have partnerships. We have partnerships with organizations like Invest in Africa, which supports SMEs to scale with capacity building, access to markets, and access to finance. We have other partners we deal with. And those partnerships enable us actually offer good rates on loans to SMEs and also help us to actually give proper capacity building. We internally, Absa provides, we run what we call our monthly SME clinics. And these it's part of our enterprise development plan. It's part of our capacity building plan. We teach SMEs how to run their companies well, how to run it more like the big companies and the big conglomerates anywhere, proper bookkeeping practices, HR, succession planning. We've had a number of those over the past year. And we didn't have one in April, but we are resuming in May, except that, of course, now we would have to deliver the content online. And so we are looking at a virtual SME clinic. And all these are supposed to help build up our SMEs to the extent that they are sustainable and they can do business in the long term. We have partnerships with the mobile money companies. We have partnerships with the financial technology companies. It's essential. You can't house all the information in one place. And it's a more efficient model if you partner with other people to deliver.
I like that. That's really great. We've got a number of questions actually coming through. So should we start kind of going through some of our attendee questions?
I think we should.
Okay, so we have one here from Prince Bwedu. I think we might have covered this. I'm going to read this out anyway. How would Absa measure risks of SMEs during this period, given there isn't kind of an end to the sight of COVID-19? I think you kind of touched on this briefly during our conversation, but that's from Prince Bwedu.
Okay, yeah, Prince, thanks for the question. I did touch on it. I did touch on the things that we will look out for is the sustainability of the business. You will look at the history of the business, but it's constant engagement to understand what the needs are and how sustainable those needs are, and also the ability of those business needs to generate sustainable revenues in order to pay back any loans. And so I think that should about cover it. If there's an area you're concerned with which I didn't cover, please do let me know.
No problem. The next one is from Aminata Conte. In these uncertainties, is it advisable for startups to invest in branding and expansion?
I think this should be a Sangu question. Because I would say, I think I said at the very beginning that in my, from my point of view, I don't think this is the time to be undertaking a huge capital expenditure, especially because of the uncertainty of the times. And that's not to say don't expand your business if you see an opportunity. You need to be clear on what the opportunity is and how sustainable it is. You need to make sure that you have the skills and the capacity to actually do that. And if you need professional advice, please do seek it. One trade I've noticed in a number of cases in the past with some SMEs and actually businesses at large is just going into areas because almost like copycatting, because it seems to be a thriving business at the point. You have to make sure you have the capacity to do it. Everybody's making sanitizers now because they're in high demand. It does not mean that that's your area of expertise and that you should necessarily expand into it if you do not have what it takes to do it. If you're going to invest in new machinery, etc., to now start up your machinery, I would say perhaps hold on and try and maximize what you currently do in other ways than to start a new thing. On branding, I would say you need to, the business needs to be sustained. You need to keep going on. So you need to brand, but you need to rethink your branding costs. Okay, you need to rethink your outflows, as I said at the beginning. So you need to keep your costs to a minimum. So don't spend mega on branding. Use more social media. It's cheaper, and it actually reaches a lot more people than you would even have envisaged than the typical print and TV, etc. media. Yeah. So please do.
I agree. I think also, as you mentioned before, it's about collaboration. So if there are organizations out there or agencies out there that can maybe collaborate and work with you, and there could be like something you can give back to them, also that's an opportunity you need to look into. But definitely, I think that's a really great idea. Our next question is from Sangu. What policies should government implement to support SMEs at a time like this?
Okay. I believe government has already issued some policies. They've asked for banks to relook at interest rates, etc. I believe what government could do more of, and I know there are plans to do this, is to almost set up an SME fund, and a fund that allows, and there have been discussions with central bank, there are things going on, to almost set up, to put aside, let's say 1% of capital, 1% of deposits, or 1% of some that is meant to just fund SMEs, and then of course spell out what it will take to qualify for access, to get access to these funds. I believe setting up of such funds and making it more accessible to SMEs would help a great deal. So that for those, it's not necessarily a fully commercial decision by the bank, but they would take a lot more risk with those funds if possible. And I think that's something, if government could support, would be very helpful.
Okay. No, that's a really great idea. I think on our last webinar, I was speaking to Andrew Techapia, who's the CEO of ZPay, and was mentioning about kind of creating a fund such as that because it's very well needed. So maybe if there could be sort of a blend with private sector and government sector to come together to actually create this fund to support SMEs, and maybe putting some kind of criteria behind it so they know who kind of will be able to utilize this platform to the best of their ability. It's a great one.
Yeah.
Next one again is from,
I have a quick question. Can I just add to that? So beyond government policy on funding and lending, I mean, do you there are other things that government could do to help SMEs, or even big businesses to buy from more SMEs because of a percentage of their procurement, for example? Do you think there are other conversations that are being had in that regard in terms of other policies beyond money?
I'm not sure I heard you completely because you were breaking up at a point, but you're asking for what other policies should be had over and beyond funding, right?
Yeah.
I believe, sometime last year, we started talking about patronizing made in Ghana stuff. I think there are some measures that have been taken by markets like Nigeria, which seem a bit extreme, but I think we actually need to think of taking some of those policy measures, almost like stop import of certain products and ensure that any procurement of those products are sought from the local SMEs, etc. Because once we use the products, SMEs will have the motivation. We can provide feedback and they'll be motivated to improve services. And now we talk about African AFSCA, which is the free trade agreement. How do we make sure that the products we put on the market are actually consumed by other African countries, if even within Ghana we do not? We need to put policy measures in place that make sure that we patronize what we produce. We need to put policy measures in place that make sure that our production base is broad and has the right quality measures in place so that we will consume them locally and we will build up to scale and then expand across Africa. it's something that it's a topic I'm actually very passionate about, and I think it's something that must absolutely be done.
Definitely. No, I agree.
Yeah, and I think beyond government, I think big business also have a responsibility to promote SMEs in that regard, to absorb some of the potential, or to rather create potential new market channels for SMEs. There's a procurement and purchasing and stuff like that for SMEs to that level of support as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that too.
Yeah, and actually COVID has taught us that it's possible, because now there's the imports aren't coming through and everybody is using the local products, aren't we? Everybody is sourcing locally. And so it shows that it's possible. At Absa, we say we are a bank of possibilities. We bring possibilities to life. And so, for instance, I can tell you that all our, most of our purchases over the period to support our COVID whatever have been from within our SME base. Okay, we made sure that we got offers from other people, but for about the SME customers we have, we've tried to buy from them, because when we grow their business, we also grow. And we must ensure that this goes on over and above and beyond government.
Yeah, we agree. Brilliant. We move on to Christopher Money, who says, regarding the accounting and bookkeeping point, do banks ensure that SMEs can access data feeds which can be easily imported into off-the-shelf softwares?
Okay, thank you, Christopher, for the question. On a case-by-case engagement basis, a customer engagement basis, we encourage and advise our clients on what packages can help them, and based on their needs, we show them what to do. The issue around the bookkeeping thing, I think it's more habitual than due to lack of access to the right systems, etc. And I've come in touch with a lot of customers who almost have 2 sets of books, and for whatever reason, for tax purposes, for whatever. And in such instances, sometimes they get mixed up. And also, you have a lot of us tend to run our businesses. We do have a lot of sole proprietorships, but you've got to run a business that is over and beyond you. Don't situate everything within you. We've got to put in the right corporate governance that allows the right procedures and policies to be in place. And so, Christopher, through our capacity building programs like the SME Clinics, we actually equip our SME clients with the skills and knowledge, and also point them in the right direction on systems to procure, etc. But it's more a behavioral thing that we need to fix, and a mindset change that we need to adopt.
Yeah. No, I agree. Thank you for that. Thank you, Christopher. We have Jerry says, if you had funds costing, say, 1% per annum, how low would you be willing to go on lending rates to SMEs?
Jerry, I can't give you a blanket answer, one cap fits all answer, because a lot goes into determining lending rate, and it's dependent on the risk profile per customer. It depends on the risk profile of the industry the customer is in, etc. So it's not just a slam dunk response. But if cost of funds were indeed 1%, I can tell you that the rates we on lend to SMEs will definitely not be as high as it currently is.
I hope that's answered your question, Jerry. Sorry.
He wants me to tell him I can lend at 5%, but I can't.
Exactly. Yeah. In a perfect world, that
we won't hold you to it. We won't hold you to it.
Maybe we'll get there one day. I don't know.
Exactly.
And a lot goes into pricing. So yeah.
No, absolutely. Now you mentioned your the clinics you hold for SMEs. Are you kind of collaborating with other, because there are a number of sort of on the private sector, a number of SME programs, platforms, groups that are trying or doing similar things. Is there an opportunity for Absa to maybe collaborate with a number of these platforms, because you're all all trying to achieve the same thing, to assist and help SMEs, not just in Ghana but across Africa? Is there an opportunity to collaborate all these different entities to come together and be able to build these clinics and have these kind of enterprise development people work closely together to support the SMEs not just in Ghana, but across Africa, because there's quite a number of them.
Yeah. Oh yes, definitely. And we do partner with a few. I think I mentioned Invest in Africa. I know we have a collaboration with Mastercard. We have a collaboration with other SME enterprise development providers where we look to do more capacity building for SMEs. We are focused currently. Absa Ghana is doing more. We also partner with organizations like Embertech. We've been doing more of our Ghanaian SMEs, but we are, as you know, as Absa, we are in 10 different markets plus South Africa, and there are even non-presence countries where we still do business, and so there is room to collaborate with more people. Actually, Embertech was co-founded by Barclays and UNDP when we used to be Barclays. Yes, so we do a lot of those collaborations, and we are in to do more because we believe in investing in the SME community. And yes, we do have room to do it across Africa.
Great, that's good to know. I've got one more question from Aminata. She says, in Sierra Leone, there's a quick action response program set up to address the economic impacts of COVID-19. Part of this action includes government engaging commercial banks to give loans to SMEs without but a short payback period. What do you think about this policy? I think we kind of mentioned this already.
Yeah, I think we spoke about it. I think it's a great policy, especially to the extent that if the government will provide some mitigation for the cost of funds for these banks, it would make it an excellent program. I know in Ghana, for instance, I spoke about the fund earlier. Commercial banks where central bank put out a directive about a month, end of March, early April, where they said, we have a cash reserve requirement that we place with them. It used to be 10% of customer deposits. The central bank said, okay, you can reduce it to 8%, and the additional 2% you can lend to, so just to provide you more liquidity to lend to customers. I know for us, for Absa, for instance, we have fully lent out, we've lent those funds out, and we've lent over and above that. But it does give a bit of, it frees up liquidity, and because those are funds that we wouldn't otherwise have received interest on, we are able to actually lend at slightly lower rates than we would have otherwise. So I believe policies like these are needed to help sustain and reboost the SME sector. So great policy.
Brilliant. Thank you. I don't have any more questions. Amma, do you have any more to share? I think we've covered quite a number of areas for both our panel, from our panel attendees.
Olivia, apparently the consumption of alcohol actually went up. Someone said.
It's not really much to do apart from work and drink, so I don't know if that makes sense. That makes complete sense.
Okay.
Oh, so that's really great.
Thanks so much, Antoinette. So I have a last question, actually. You talked about a system across the continent, and I wondered if you observed any gaps in terms of entrepreneurship support and programming, and any recommendations for potential changes or improvements to provide services to SMEs. What are your thoughts?
Olivia, did you hear that?
Not really, no. Amma, do you want to type it and I can read it? Because
yes.
The thing is buffering.
Sure. I'll do that right now.
Super. Connectivity is slightly dodgy. I guess everybody's at home online, kind of Zooming, so
yeah,
the network's slightly slow. But you work with what you've got. Let's see if there are any other questions to bridge the gap. Okay. Okay, so Amma's saying, what are your thoughts on the gaps in the entrepreneurship ecosystem?
Okay, what are my thoughts on the gaps in the entrepreneurship ecosystem?
What do we miss?
Did she put it somewhere? So, okay, what are your thoughts on the gaps in the entrepreneurship ecosystem? I believe a lot of the gaps in the entrepreneurship ecosystem actually comes from a lack of belief in ourselves, actually. And we do need, in terms of support, provision, and infrastructure. Yeah, I think it still boils down. It still boils down to a lack of faith in the business that we do. And for us at Absa, we believe in looking at the ecosystem end to end. And actually, my head of business banking director was on ScaleUp a couple of weeks ago. We call her ecosystem. She's passionate about ecosystem.
It's just amazing place.
Yes, that's amazing. She's amazing. She's simply amazing. Yes, she lives and breathes ecosystem. And as a business, we try to look at our customers end to end. So we look at it from the individual right up to the large corporates that are within a certain chain. And we try to provide for all of that. I don't know if that happens in every organization, and it's something we need to do. But I also believe that we need strong policies and to help support and drive this ecosystem approach, because that's where the opportunity lies. As Africa, whether we like it or not, we are more SME and informal driven than anything else. And we need to figure out how to help the small and medium enterprises grow to become large corporates and conglomerates, like I said on LinkedIn the other day. And in order to do that, we need more support. We need better infrastructure. And the funding will come from the banks, but even the GDO, the Global Development Organizations, the non-governmental organizations, the governments, we all need to sing from the same hymn book. Currently, everybody is trying to do their own little bit in their own little corner, and it's not good enough. We need to join it up and make sure that the ecosystem actually links up and we are providing the right support. That's the only way the African dream will actually take off. And those are my thoughts.
I agree.
Thank you. We are definitely on the same hymn sheet, Antoinette, so we'll be talking more and hopefully collaborating a lot more to make that happen. So I think we're up to time. It's 12:30, and so yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll give some final thoughts before just a couple of sentences. And all I'd like to highlight is the fact that it's chaotic. We are in a time of crisis. However, as we've said several times on this webinar, in the time of chaos, there are loads of opportunities. So if you're an SME out there, look for those opportunities, create the opportunities. Things are changing, yes. Adapt and innovate and make sure that you take advantage of the opportunities that are coming up. Capitalize on the right relations, on the existing relationships, collaborate and have a plan. Please don't just jump on the bandwagon and follow the next person because you're doing something. Believe in what you're doing and make sure that you position yourself to provide and deliver opportunistic products. Because believe me, not even the sky is the limit. I believe SMEs have room to grow beyond our wildest imagination. So I wish you all the best. And thank you to Amma and Olivia and ScaleUp Africa for this series. I believe it's an opportune opportunity and the timing is just right for you to be doing this. So thank you for your vision, and I wish you all the very best. And thank you, Sangu, for doing all the hard work before I came on.
Thanks, Sangu.
Thank you. Thanks. Do you have any last words before we cap off?
Sangu's still on.
I think he still is. Thank you. No. No. Well,
Yeah, that's
ladies
fine.
and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Sangu. Thank you, Antoinette, for spending time and giving us some really pragmatic advice and steps and practical things that we need to start looking at in the space of sort of our mindset, money, and model. But just, you know, hoping to assist and help as many SMEs as possible. That's what ScaleUp Africa is all about. And so if you've enjoyed this and if you have any further questions, please email us at scaleupprogram@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram on all the major kind of platforms, YouTube, Instagram, where we'll be uploading up the videos. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to it from the beginning, you'll be able to see it on YouTube. And I think we are over and out. Amma, we're good?
Thank you, everyone. Echoing your remarks. So thank you so much again, Sangu and Antoinette. We really appreciate you guys participating today. So we'll see you soon, and
great. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you all very soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the participants.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Bye.